My newest book, Experiences Framework, The Nature of Behavior in Life in the New Covenant, has been available on Amazon for a couple of weeks now. So I thought I would, as a introduction, read the first chapter, hopefully stir up some interest. In the first book in this series, the creation of man, the fall of man, and God's subsequent work to free man from enslavement to sin was explored. Because man had chosen to rebel against God, he enslaved himself to the power of death and put himself in a place where man could not attain freedom of his own. It was only by God acting first through the incarnation that man was set free and brought back to a right relationship with his Creator. There's a simple phrase that summarizes the main message of this second book. There are words and phrases that are often used to describe the behavior of certain individuals that behave outside of societal norms. He was a monster, he was bestial, or he was a savage. All designate someone's behavior as not human. When someone acts outside of what is expected or approved of within that particular culture, he is regarded as not human or inhuman. There is an understandable aspect to this, but there is also an error in this response as well. The definition of appropriate is subjective, as it depends upon the culture that defines it. It is also dependent upon the period of history in which the judgment of behavior is taking place. What is culturally acceptable in 2023 was not appropriate 50 years ago, and most likely, and unfortunately, what will be acceptable in 2100 is not appropriate today. This book will attempt to articulate the nature and foundation of Christian behavior, regardless of culture or time. The term truly human is that which will sought to be defined. From the historic Christian perspective, being truly human is not dependent upon any particular culture or time period, but on that which Jesus Christ identified as being human. In Mark 12:28-31, when questioned by the scribes, Jesus gave a summary of the faithful Christian life. And one of the scribes came up and heard them disputing with one another, and seeing that he answered them well, asked him, "Which commandment is the most important of all?" Jesus answered, "The most important is, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. And you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. The second is this, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. There is no other commandment greater than these." In answering the question this way, Jesus was not disagreeing with the Mosaic law of the Old Covenant, nor was he advocating for anarchy. Prior to the resurrection of Jesus Christ, mankind as a whole was in a singular state. Because of man's fall into sin and the subsequent enslavement to death, those within the nation of Israel had only the few years of life in which to be faithful to the law given them by God through Moses, and those outside of the covenant, people of God, had natural law. Within this short temporality, men were either part of the people of God, i.e. the Jews, or they were considered Gentiles, those outside of the Old Covenant. But in both cases, men had expectations required of them. For those within Israel, the Mosaic law was the standard by which to live. For these, covenantal faithfulness meant longer life, health, many children, agricultural abundance, and peace in the land, while covenantal unfaithfulness meant the opposite. For those outside of the covenant, natural law was plainly evident, and this was the standard by which he was required to live. The Apostle Paul in Romans 2 verses 6-11 says, "He will render to each one according to his works. To those who by patience and well-doing seek for glory and honor and immortality, he will give eternal life. But for those who are self-seeking and do not obey the truth, but obey unrighteousness, there will be wrath and fury. There will be tribulation and distress for every human being who does evil, the Jew first and also the Greek, but glory and honor and peace for everyone who does good, the Jew first and also the Greek, for God shows no partiality." His words here are very clear. All men will be judged according to their works and within the context of their world. God sends no one to hell, but instead holds each man accountable for the works he did based on what he knew. Regardless of Jew or Gentile, God shows no partiality. The Jew in the time prior to the incarnation, who lived within a culture defined by Mosaic law, will be judged according to that standard. Whereas the Gentile of that time period, that is, anyone outside of Israel, will be judged according to the natural law in the context of his culture. With the arrival of the incarnation and the redemptive work of Jesus Christ in restoring the relationship between God and man, the Jew-Gentile distinction has been removed. What has not changed is the idea of judgment of one's works that is based on what one knows. The man who has never heard the gospel, nor has ever heard of Jesus Christ, will not see his works judged by the standard of the gospel. He who has heard the gospel and has willingly and deliberately rejected that message will see his works judged in light of that deliberate, conscious act. In both cases, these persons will be judged according to the standard of love. As Jesus summarized the responsibility of man as loving God and loving one's neighbor, either man within the context of his covenantal relationship with God or outside of the covenant, love is the requirement. The goal of life of man is to be truly human. Regardless of when that man lived, the judgment he will experience will be based on his works. For the Jew, the question of how he lived out the Mosaic law as an act of love toward his neighbor is still a judgment of his works. For the Gentile, outside of the covenant, prior to the incarnation, the question of how he loved his neighbor will take place within the context of natural revelation. Since the death, resurrection, and ascension of Jesus Christ, men no longer live under the Mosaic covenant and have been freed from the blinding power of sin and death. Our calling to be truly human is a call to love everyone by the standard of truth, as revealed in the gospel and or in the natural world. Love is not defined by the way one feels or the way one prefers to act. Love is defined by those thoughts, words, and actions that move oneself and others toward holiness. God created man to love him and to be loved in return. To be truly human is to love.